All right, there we go. So this evening, we are talking about the para swimmer development pathway. And I am very honored today. I am joined by Cynthia Berringer, who was a national team member of our para swimming team. And I will be speaking to her a little bit later in this session. But first, I wanted to go over some of the things that we know about the para swimmer development pathway. In the other part of my life, I am a PhD candidate and I research para swimmer development. And so tonight I am going to talk through a little bit of some of the findings from my research. Some things were a little surprising. A lot of it was just reconfirming things that we already knew about the para athlete development pathway. So I would just like to share my screen so I can go through a few things. Pictures are always a little bit better than just my face, so we will do that as well. All right. So the one thing that I want to start off by saying is that in Canada, we do not have a specific para swimmer development pathway. We utilize the long-term development model that is put out by Sport for Life. It is the model that all of the national sports organizations use when they're discussing athlete development. There is people out there that question whether it is appropriate to use a model that was developed for mainstream athletes when working with para swimmers or para athletes. And I believe my own self, I believe that there is merit to using this model, but I also believe that there is merit to discussions about a para athlete specific model as well. So this is the model. Maybe you've seen it. Basically what this is used for is this is what guides our decisions and our programming when it comes to how we progress athletes through their development. So this is nice and pretty. It's been updated 3 times now. We're on the 3rd edition of this. And each time they have added a little bit more that they feel is more para athlete focused. So on here, you can see there is first involvement and awareness. Those 2 stages were originally added specifically with para athletes in mind, understanding that first of all, we need to build more awareness around para sport and that sport is available to all. And secondly, recognizing the importance of a positive first experience or first involvement in sport, and recognizing that that is not always the case when it comes to para athletes. So they recognize those 2 things and they added these to the model. So they have also adapted it in the 3rd rendition, and that is why it's up the side. Those 2 are up the side. They recognize that in para sport, people can come in at any age and stage. And so that's why those are on the side there that to represent they can go throughout the model. They used to be at the bottom. So again, they're recognizing a few things about para athletes. So that is great. So when we look at the beginning steps of the para swimmer development pathway, people are coming in active start and fundamentals. Active start is when you're a kid and you're playing with mom and dad at the pool or at the beach, just kind of getting wet. Fundamentals is when we get to the part where we're actually learning the skills needed for swimming. Why is this important? This is important because most of individuals with an impairment do not engage in sport and physical activity to the point where it is actually making a benefit to their health. In fact, only 1.3% of individuals with a physical impairment are engaging in sport to the point where it's going to make a difference compared to 39% of the general population. We know that 3% of individuals with impairments are engaging in sport or in physical activity. But again, those numbers are really low. So this is why it is so important, this awareness and this active start stages where we're getting people out and getting them active. And then the other piece that really runs in this is physical literacy needs to be the focus. With parasport, what we know tends to happen is that individuals start one sport and that's where they stay. For a number of reasons, it can be because they're unaware of other opportunities. It can become because of lack of funding, lack of transportation, lack of volunteers. There's a whole list of reasons why that happens, but we know that it happens. And we know that this affects people's ability to increase their physical literacy. So physical literacy is basically your ability to move in different planes and to be able to control your body. What happens when we don't engage in multiple sporting opportunities is that we don't learn all those different skills. There's studies out now that actually this is a problem also for high performance athletes, such as NHL hockey players. There are NHL hockey players who cannot play catch because they never learned that skill because they were always on the ice. So that's one of the things that kind of happens. You don't learn all the basic skills, and we want people to be healthy athletes for life, as well as good swimmers. So we really need to be promoting the engagement in multiple sports or physical activities. And it doesn't all have to be structured. It can be just playing sports at recess or a gym class. And again, this is part of the awareness piece we're trying to raise in the schools, is different opportunities and options for students to engage in physical activity. So what we need parents, clubs, and coaches to be aware of the importance of engagement in multiple sport opportunities, and to not only be aware of it, but also to be encouraging of it. When we look at clubs and coaches, they need to be aware that they need to adapt their scheduling. In swimming, we have a really bad habit of having multiple practices at very young ages, and there's reasons for that, but it also impacts athletes' abilities to engage in other activities. So that's something that coaches and clubs need to be aware of. Also, cost of engaging in multiple sports, that can get really expensive. So are there ways that we can bring costs down, or can we build partnerships with other sports? I know that there's at least one club in Ontario that has partnerships with water polo, and I think another might be their diving club, I can't remember, and they kind of trade off on activities in a week, or athletes are encouraged to do all three activities, things that get them moving their bodies in different ways. So we need parents, clubs, and coaches to be aware that this is very important, especially in this beginning stages of engagement in sport, and to start making programming around that. So how am I trying to address this with Swim Ontario is I am looking at partnering with Athletics Ontario to offer a multi-sport try-it event where we're going to have children, youth new to parasport and their families engage in both swimming for a morning and then athletics for the afternoon, so that they can come out and get a taste of what both of these sports are about and begin to realize that there's other options out there. We're also inviting other sports to come and to set up little booths, and also to talk to the athletes again. Let's be sharing in parasport. Let's make sure that people are able to find the sport that fits for them, not just the one sport that's next door. We need to be letting people know that there's multiple options out there. As much as I want them to fall in love with swimming, of course, also aware that there's benefits to being engaged in multiple sporting opportunities. So the other piece of fundamentals is that it's learning to swim. In swimming, the one thing that's unique about swimming is that for the most part, our club system is not as engaged in teaching the basic skills of the sport as compared to other sports. Learning to swim tends to happen in community programs or municipality programs or YMCAs, things like that. So outside of our club system. The one reason why parents are signing up their children that have impairments to learn to swim is rehabilitation and physical therapy. So wanting alternative motives than potentially the parents of a mainstream athlete is looking for when they're signing them up to learn a new skill. And so what this means is it's even more important that we have these positive first experiences so that people can continue to engage for reasons of rehab, but it's also fun. And if rehab is fun, people will continue to do it. So this puts a little bit of pressure on our Learn to Swim programs to make sure that those first involvement activities are really positive. Where does it become positive? My research tells me that most paraswimmers do best if they learn how to swim in a one-on-one environment, or with instructors who are trained in a variety of techniques and are able to adapt the swimming modalities to the individuals. So how do we adapt it for someone who has a visual impairment? How do we adapt it for someone who has a spinal cord injury? How do we adapt it for someone who has weakness? And so the truth of the matter is most of our Learn to Swim programs are run by younger individuals who don't have much exposure to working with individuals with impairments. So how do we address that? Well, right now I am currently working on a Learn to Swim instructors training resource that we're hoping to get out to the Life Saving Society, to the YMCAs, so that their instructors are better educated when it comes to working with athletes with an impairment. So next we move up our model here, and we are Learn to Train. So Learn to Train is when we're entering into clubs. And the interesting thing about this is that most individuals with an impairment were told about competitive swimming opportunities by others. It wasn't that they were out searching for a competitive swimming opportunity. It's that they had a friend, a doctor, a family member who was like, oh, hey, I heard about this program. Maybe you'd be interested in trying it out. The reason why this is so significant is that we need clubs to be making it very clear in their advertising that they are open to working with paraswimmers, and they need that messaging to go out to the general public, not just targeted to paraswimmers, but actually to the general public to make it known. And it also has to be very clearly stated. Things like open to all abilities, that can be a little bit broad. That can be misleading for some people. So wanting clubs and needing clubs to be very clear about who they're comfortable with and what they're open to learning more about. So this leads us to awareness, and the awareness piece on that, again, that's what the Pools to Schools program is all about. We are trying to address awareness with our youngest in the province, because they, as the saying goes, they are our future. And so we want them to be aware of what is out there and available. Learn to Train, this is when classification becomes a thing. And when we get to classification at this point, it is paperwork. So classification for level 1 is filling out paperwork on swimming.ca, the request for sport class evaluation, and then you get a medical form sent to you that you take that to your doctor fills that out and sends it back. And if you are identified as having an eligible impairment, you get a level 1. A level 1 gives you codes of exemption, which helps with the fairness of competition. So if you are a arm amputee, let's say, you get a code so that you have to have an intent to touch on breaststroke, but they're recognizing you don't have 2 hands, you're not going to touch at the same time. So it makes competition more fair, and it starts in that level 1. Level 1 is also your initial steps into the para community. And what we're trying to do there to address this is we are trying to offer some grassroots programming to those that are level 1. So we have some plans for some virtual programming in January, and then we are looking towards the spring of potentially offering some in-person regional camps to really target grassroots, those that are new, and how do we best support the athletes, the families, and also the coaches. Moving up, we are at Train to Train. Train to Train, this is when athletes are really starting to compete in sanctioned meets. And this is where coach education becomes a really big thing. So athletes identify that coaches who have prior experience working with paraswimmers and who have knowledge of paraswimming, the more educated that the coaches are, the better the experience for the athletes. So what kind of things do coaches need to be aware of? Well, there's the rule modifications, like those codes of exemption. There are adaptive technologies, impairment specifics. Some impairments are going to affect the way that you teach someone to swim or improve their swimming differently. And what are those and what does that look like? And coaches need to be aware of where to find the information. We cannot expect coaches, and I would never expect coaches to know everything about every impairment, but coaches need to be supported in knowing where to find those resources. And that is part of my position, my role. And that is also something that we're working on at Swim Ontario with putting a resource hub onto the Swim Ontario website. Coaches need to start thinking about accessibility considerations. I can speak from experience that when you are ambulatory and you're walking, you see the world very differently than when, let's say, you use a walker or a wheelchair. I used to wear my prosthetic all the time, and then life changed for me and I started using a wheelchair more and more, and it definitely makes you much more aware of what's accessible and what's not. So we need coaches to be aware of the things that they need to be taking into consideration when they are setting up a practice, when they are going to swim meets, what kind of considerations they need to have. And these were all things that we discussed in this REACH webinar series. And you can find the recordings of prior sessions on the Swim Ontario YouTube channel. Coaches also need to be aware that in parasport, there's an enhanced role of parents and family, whether that is to provide support for activities of daily living, whether that is an advocacy role. Parents just have a little more engagement typically than the typical mainstream parent might have. At this level, we are talking about classification level 2. So to do your level 2, you need to be 12 years of age. You also need to be very proficient in your technical abilities. So there is a technical assessment that takes place at a level 2. So there's a bench test, which is like a physio exam. And then after that, you would move into a water test. And in the water test, you need to be able to perform all of the strokes to a high proficiency, so a high level, so that the technical classifiers can tell whether your impairment or whether your ability to move in the water is inhibited due to your impairment, or if it's because of your technique and you're not being a very strong swimmer. So you don't really want a classifier guessing. So in order to take away that guessing, you want to be really sound in your technique before you go through a level 2 classification. We have a level 2 classification coming up in January on the 19th. If people are interested or ready, I should say, ready for their level 2, forms need to be submitted to Swimming Canada by December 22nd. And if you need more information on that, please contact me. Excuse me. The other part of classification is that we need coaches aware of what classification is and when it's appropriate and when the timing is right for their athletes. We are now trying in Ontario to host a level 2 classification every January so that it's consistent, so that coaches can plan ahead and know where it's going to fit into their athletes' development pathway, just what we're talking about here. All right, so we get to train to compete, and this is when we're really into those higher levels of competition. So the competitions we're talking about, provincials, Can-Ams. For those who don't know, Can-Ams is a para-specific swim meet, so only para swimmers are there, and it is Canadians and Americans, and then now it's grown. There's some international, other international athletes who come, and it is hosted in December. This year it is happening, actually starts tomorrow, and it is 1 year in the States and then 1 year in Canada. So next December, this meet will be, I believe it's in BC next year. And it's just a really great atmosphere. It's an opportunity to actually race head to head against others in your classification. Currently in Canada, due to our lack of depth, we tend to race more multi-class, where it's all about the points system. And that's a whole nother presentation. I can talk to you more about that if you'd like. Contact me and we can do that. So it's just a really nice experience to be able to race head to head with other people in your classification. So that's what happens at Can-Ams. Standards for Can-Ams tend to be between provincial standards and Easterns. Depends on the classification. Canada does not have sole control over those standards, so that's why they're a little bit all over the place. Eastern Championships is that next level up on the way towards nationals. Canadian Swimming Championships is an integrated meet, so we have mainstream and para athletes competing at the same level, which is an amazing step in the right direction of highlighting our elite para swimmers. And then there's trials. So each of these meets have different standards. You can find all of the standards for these meets at this link here. Again, if you're interested, let me know. I will send you that link, and all the standards that you need to know are there. So we're talking about national level meets. So one thing that we're trying to do in Ontario to help our athletes be better prepared when they take the step past these is onto the national team or national development teams, and they're doing tours, is we're trying to offer a tour of an Ontario team tour. We did our first one. We just did that at the beginning of the month. We went to Saskatoon, where there was a level 3 classification and competition opportunity. And I thought it was a great success. We had lots of fun. We had 10 athletes that went through the classification process, got lots of experience, and also really importantly, got to hang out with other paraswimmers. It's been 2 years. It's been a long time. So that was a great opportunity for those athletes to reconnect or to connect for the first time. Also in the mix of these meets is Canada Games. So Canada Games is age dependent, and it's a little bit older for paraswimmers because we recognize that sometimes athletes can come in at different ages, as we discussed earlier. And so Canada Games, it really depends on your age and when you come in, where Canada Games fits into your development, which is why I don't have it listed here. Also, it's only a small group of paraswimmers who get to go to that competition. So it's a great opportunity. It's lots of fun if it works within your cycling. It just doesn't always necessarily work into everyone's because it's only once every 4 years. So when we get to national meets, we're now talking about classification. That's level 3. So level 3, what it differs from level 2 is that there is 3 parts. So there is a bench test, there's a water test, and then there's an observation assessment. So that is where the classifiers watch you swim to solidify or to help them if they're on the fence about the classification to see you in a race environment. So it's a little more natural than what the water test is. So some of the things that we saw throughout development that are important to paraswimmers' development is connecting with others like me. Majority of our paraswimmers in Ontario swim in integrated environments where they are the only or maybe one of a few individuals with impairments. And so it's really important that we provide them with opportunities to connect. Not only are individuals with an impairment the only one in their club, sometimes they could be the only one in their school. So they don't get those opportunities to connect with people who have similar life experiences. And we really need to be making a conscious effort of having these opportunities made possible. Other paraswimmers help introduce paraswimmers to the sport, whether it's a personal invitation or if it's seeing them do it, whether it's watching a World Championships or a Pan Am Games. Seeing others like themselves competing really encourages individuals to think that that could be something that they could look into. It's also competition. When you get to go to a meet and there's other paraswimmers there and you're actually racing for something, instead of just against the clock, it just raises your game and the excitement of it all. Additionally, acceptance, as we said, being around others who understand a little bit of what your life is like, just has such a sense of belonging. And the more people feel that they belong, the more likely they are to stay in the sport. Also mentorship. Being around other paraswimmers lets people know that they can ask questions and see what others went through, again, in the pool and in life. So this is something that we need to be intentional about. We need to be allowing these opportunities and providing these opportunities to our paraswimmers if we want to keep them in the pool. So some of the ways that I'm attempting to do this is by having things like this, by having virtual camps. And also I'm very excited. We have an in-person camp on January 20th. We are having our first in-person camp in over 2 years. This camp is for those that have a level 2 classification and at least 1 provincial standard. We're going to be doing this camp in Toronto at TPASC. So there is information that is going to be sent out. If it hasn't been sent out today, it should be sent out tomorrow. And we're really super excited about that camp, and again, bringing athletes together. Also competitions. If you are a coach and you are looking at a competition, it might be worth looking and seeing who else is at the meets that you're thinking about going to, and if they have any paraswimmers. Really being intentional about allowing our paraswimmers to have competition, not just at provincials, but at other meets throughout the year as well. We also need networking opportunities. We need opportunities to chat and learn from each other. So that is something that is also on the horizon. That's something that the Swim Ontario Conference is really good at, allowing opportunities for people to come together and chat. So I really encourage people to really think about whether they would be interested in attending the conference. Who knows if it'll be in person or not, but either way, we can come and chat and connect. The other piece that throughout development, parents are advocates. Parents, if you're a parent, you already know this, they speak on behalf of their kids. And when your child has an impairment, your role as an advocate is just stepped up that little bit more. We need coaches to be aware of that, and to see parents as someone that they're working alongside to make the best opportunities for their children, and to make sure that they are able, they are welcomed into the conversations. For parents, parents need the skills and knowledge in order to advocate. Parents need to not only be aware of what their child's abilities are and their child's impairment entails, but they also need to have knowledge about swimming to know when they should say something and when they shouldn't. So to try and help that, I am hoping to be hosting some, as I said earlier, some regional in-person camps for grassroots levels. And there will be a parent session with those camps, because I recognize how important it is for parents to have the opportunity to ask questions and also to meet each other. And lastly, fast progression. Para swimmers, they move through the competitive levels on an average half the time of a mainstream swimmer. We need to recognize that. We need to recognize that there could be some unforeseen consequences to that. And we need to be making ways of potentially slowing it down, or at least preparing the athletes before they get to these high level meets and aren't ready to deal with those situations, whether it's emotionally, psychologically, or even physically. And so that's why we're trying to offer these camps and these tours and these opportunities earlier in the pathway, so that when that acceleration phase happens, when people make it to nationals, and it's a really quick jump sometimes to the international stage, that they are prepared to do that. So a lot of what I do is very motivated in trying to prepare those athletes for those next levels. Lastly, when we look at the long-term development model, we have different organizations that are in charge of different areas of development. So at Fundamentals, Active Start, we have local sports. Then from Learn to Train up to just about Train to Compete, we have provincial sports, and then national sports organizations kind of take off after there. Unfortunately, based on my research, this is more of what para athletes see. Para athletes tend to see their national sports organization having a bigger role in their development, and that the provincial sports organizations really don't have much. This is what I am trying to address through my position, is trying to show and be engaged with para swimmers earlier in the development, so that they feel better supported, and that they're not looking to the national organization simply because the national organization is all about high performance and not about so much about development. So we want to make sure that there is a room in there for the provincial sports organization to be able to influence development at the appropriate times. So we want it to look like this. This is where we're trying to get back to, so that the provincial sports organization has a role. Okay, I have thrown a lot of knowledge at you guys really quickly, but you are welcome to always send me any questions that you may have. I'm always happy to chat. I'm always happy to talk with coaches, parents, swimmers on ways that we can improve your development pathway, and make this a very positive experience for you. So this is all great. This is all theoretical, but now I am very happy that I have Cynthia Berringer here tonight. And Cynthia is a national team member, and she's a little bit removed, which I actually love, because when you're a little bit outside of the community, you can speak a little more frankly, and that is what I have asked Cynthia to do tonight. So Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me tonight, Dardai, and I'm looking forward to sharing my story with everyone.
Awesome. So we're going to kind of talk our way through the development pathway. So can you, first of all, maybe you could tell people what what is your impairment? If you're on the national team, you have one. So could you
All
please tell
right,
us what it is?
so I have cerebral palsy with ataxia. So the CP part of it affects my right side more than my left side. So I present as more of a hemi, but I was diagnosed as diplegia. And the ataxia part affects my balance and my visual perception and part of my coordination. So basically, how the doctor described it to my parents was, if you walk normally, and woke up and walked the way I do, you'd feel like you're walking on a moving bus. And in the visual perception field, it's basically like, I know the chair is right beside me here, but I don't know how far the chair is from me. I know it's there, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how far it is, which really did affect me in the pool, because that made doing things like a flip turn very, very challenging. And other things that needed timing and space, diving off the block. It was very hard for me to balance, and then it was also very hard for me to realize that I wasn't going to hit the bottom of the pool, because I thought it was closer to me than it actually was. So.
Wow. All right. So how did you hear about paraswimming?
So I heard about paraswimming through the aquatics head at Blurview Kids Rehab. So around age 4, I started swimming lessons at Blurview, and then as I developed my skills in the pool, my mom moved me to a community run program in a community center closer to our home. So at one point I was doing swimming lessons once a week at Blurview and once a week at the community center. Then around age 12, it became very apparent that I enjoyed swimming, and I could swim independently to a certain extent, but I wasn't progressing in the community center run swimming lessons, because they were running it on the color levels, and I couldn't get past like the second or third color, because there was some sort of technical skill that I couldn't perform. Example, the whip kick, or demonstrating that I could do a pencil dive. So I would always stay at the same level. I was getting older, and the kids were still young, and it was just getting very frustrating for me. And then on the other side of things at Blurview, it was more a therapeutic atmosphere, and the other kids that were with me had higher needs than I did. So really we weren't doing much swimming. So the decision was to get in contact with Variety Village and see what they had to offer there in the pool. So at first it wasn't talking about competitive swimming. So at first my mom contacted the village, and we set up a tour, and I met with a variety of coaches, and I tried synchro, and I tried a few athletic sports, but in the end I decided I wanted to do competitive swimming. So then Vicky Keith invited me to a practice, and the rest is history.
Excellent. And what was your experiences on the variety swim team?
So once I started swimming with Variety Village, the first thing that it provided me was a space to be on a team. So being a child with a disability, one of the things I came home and told my mom most of the time was, really, I want to wear a shirt with a number on the back like the other kids in my class. But because I never was able to pass a tryout or even attempt to go to a tryout, because many of the sports were running or just track and field, things I couldn't do, I didn't have that opportunity. So I want to wear a shirt a number on my back, and Variety Village was that first place where I was able to get my cap and wear it and swim alongside kids just like me and go to meets and make friends and just sort of feel that team atmosphere, as well as learn to swim at a higher level.
Awesome. So what did your movement through the competitive levels look like?
Okay, so in 2000, so I was 13, September of 2000, I joined the Variety Village Flame Swim team, and I swam twice a week in, I guess, what we would call now the grassroots beginner program. And then in 2003, and at that time I had got my initial classification of S7, SB7, SM7. And then in 2003, I made my first provincial standard by a very, very small margin, a tenth of a second. Still remember.
Hey, you still made it.
In the SB7 100 breaststroke. So that allowed me to go to provincials and get my provincial classification. So at provincials, I was reclassed and I was classed down to an S7, SB6, SM7. So all of a sudden, young me who was still learning to swim, the doors open for me to qualify a little easier in my event. So we went back and all of a sudden I became a breaststroker. And then in 2005, I qualified for my first nationals in the 100 breaststroke. And I went to nationals and got reclassed again. I got my first national classification and I got classed down to an S6, SB6, SM6 across the board. I was a 6 now. So that opened the door to more events. All of a sudden, overnight, I became a 400 freestyler. So I became a distancer, which I was really excited about because I liked swimming distance in practice, but I didn't have the qualifying standard to go to a meet with it. So it really wasn't a focus of practice. So all of a sudden I had two things to work on it in practice. And then in 2006, I got invited to my first development tour with Team Canada. I was invited to the 2006 Can-Am Games in Atlanta, Georgia. And at that point, I got my first international classification. And at that point, everything stayed the same. So I remained a 6 across the board. So it was just sort of, that event was as you said earlier, experience for me. I connected for the first time with different para athletes from different clubs around Canada and the United States. We did the whole camp development thing. So we went through practices as a team. We went through some mental prep, things I hadn't done before. So it was just sort of that beginning stage to what it could be like if you were part of the national team on tour. And then in 2007, I made my first Can-Am standard on my own. So I qualified in the 400 freestyle. So I went to Can-Am's in 2007 again and got internationally classed again, because at this point I was 20 going on 21. So it was time for me to get that classification. Once you're 21, at that point it was a fixed thing unless something changed. And I got classed down to an S6, SB5, S6. So then all of a sudden I became the breaststroker again. And so after 2006, just like you said, the progression got really, really fast. And I actually didn't I actually had difficulty at first processing it all. Like, okay, Cynthia, so now you've been invited to this camp. So now you need to increase your practice time in the water. You need to be doing more dry land. And it just kind of all hit me all at once. I was like, okay, but, and it was basically because the numbers had changed. I was getting stronger, but also the classification numbers had changed. So that opened more doors for me as a national level athlete. So then in 2006, 2007, I had some decisions to make, which I think we'll talk about in another question. But in 2009, I made my first my first senior national team, and I went to IPC Short Course Worlds in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And that was my first time traveling with the team on my own, the 16-hour flight and everything. And my first time traveling on my own without my parents. So this was a big meet for me, just socially, emotionally, like just figuring it all out. And I, on top of all that, figuring out how to manage myself, how to travel, how to be in a climate that's not like ours, as well as train and race outside. It was, I would say that experience was a big building block to me realizing, yes, I can do this, because I did have some just difficulties there, just processing it all. Like you said, sometimes when things happen very quickly, you're just not ready for it. And I wasn't, but I still had a lot of fun, and I connected with a lot of athletes who had already done this many times. One being my former coach, Rafael Polinario's daughter, who was like my mentor through the whole thing, especially when things got a little bit rough, when I had to swim finals in the dark and got really scared. Anyways, and so then, but I came home and I felt like, yes, I really want to do this. I just have to manage my training a little bit differently. And then in 2011, I was selected to the senior national team. And at this point I was carded to go to the Pan Pacific Para Swimming Championships in Edmonton in Canada. And I have to say that this was my best experience as an athlete. Coming off Rio and having that experience of knowing what was coming, and then having it on home soil, having it in an indoor arena, having that much more maturity, it was the best experience that I had. And just, I was able to be a teammate. I was able to medal for Team Canada, which is the best experience ever. And I was just able to enjoy the process, but the maturity was there at that point. So and I came home, and after that, and I was set for 2012, and went to trials in 2012, had an amazing experience. But as it sometimes works out, it didn't work out as I had planned. And then in 2013, I decided it was time for me to retire and continue my education and obtain my Bachelor of Education and start my professional goals of being a teacher.
Nice. So Cynthia, you touched on a few things there that I think is really important for people to understand. Classifications change. I think sometimes we get this idea that we get in a class and that's going to be it. And really, for very few individuals, particularly like if you're an amputee, that happens. But for the rest of the individuals, particularly those with neurological impairments, classification can shift based on a number of things. It can shift due to classifier education. It can shift due to the manual. They update the manual every 4 to 5 years, so it can shift due to that. It can shift due to athletes growing, changing, evolving. So I just really think it's important, as your story shows, classifications can change, and that's okay. It has everything to do with the system and nothing to do with the athlete. And so I think that's a really good point for people to really take. The other piece that goes along with that, as you mentioned, is that it's important to train multiple events. Even if we think we are a brushstroker, you still want to keep the other events open to you. If something shifts, if something changes, and now you need to swim that race, you don't want it to be a shock in the, and so we want to make sure that athletes are really well-rounded, regardless of what event you qualify for a meet or a team on. You want to make sure that you're really well-rounded. And then that your experiences about short course worlds and all of those firsts that you were saying, so many firsts in that. That is the reason why I am really pushing for Ontario to hopefully continue to have a tour team once a year, so that those firsts can happen at a provincial level.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Internationally world championship. So that is one of the reasons why I'm really pushing for that. So really, I really appreciate those pieces from your story. Can you tell us, what were your biggest challenges when you were moving through the competitive levels?
So I think the first biggest challenge was in 2006, after being ID'd for the first time and then coming back from Atlanta and having all these things that the national team had said I should start trying to do in order to progress to the next level, and realizing that on the Flames at the moment, it wasn't going to happen due to a few things. So first and foremost, I was coming to practice 2 times a week, and the discussion was to increase it to at least 5 times a week, which makes sense. But I live in the west end of Toronto, and Variety Village's home base is in Scarborough, which is in the east end. And at this point, we had been traveling for a number of years, and a 30-minute drive that was at the beginning was now turning into a 45, 50-minute drive. And I was also at school, and I wasn't in a position to move. And I think that's a point too that wasn't quite understood when I was discussing my challenges when I wanted to move. Was the big thing was, well, move to the East End or move to Montreal. And it was like I was not in a space where I could do that, just because of some of the other things I was doing for physio, where I was in school. It just didn't work for me. So I had to make a decision to look for a team closer to home. And I really thought at that point this was going to be an easy process, because I had teammates at school, in my university. I knew younger athletes in my neighborhood who were training on clubs. I had a number of clubs in my head. I thought as a national level athlete, this wouldn't be a big deal. Well, I was kind of wrong. So, but that was my first main struggle, is just this deciding that it was time to go. It was time to leave Variety Village, the place where I started, the place where I had developed those relationships. It's in some ways the safe place, right? So that was the first one. The second one was then realizing that I was wrong in thinking that it would be easy to find another team closer to home. So access to swim clubs closer in proximity to my home, who had coaches and coaching staff who were equipped and willing to have an S6, SB5, and I emphasize that, on their team that was that had a typically able-bodied structure, was a very, very difficult process. And I think one of the main things there was that and I didn't understand why. Like, I would get these blunt no's with no explanation as to why it was a no. It was just a no. Or or I had a number of coaches tell me it's not in the club's philosophy. Well, that's fine, but please explain to me what the philosophy is so that I have a better understanding of why you're saying no. Because this young athlete, with just these no's with no explanation, started to think, well, it must be just because I'm different, or because I'm too slow, or because I have a disability, which is not what we want, because that's what we get at school a lot of the time. That's what we get in society. That's not what we want to see in sport, right? So I went through a time where I was very upset, anxious, and I just was frustrated because I didn't understand. But the good news is, after numerous no's, I did get one yes, that ended up being the best decision I made for my swimming career, and one of the most memorable experiences I will ever have. So those were my two biggest struggles, um, within the when as I was moving through.
So Cynthia, your struggles to find a club that was open and accepting, that is something that we are still addressing, and we're doing it through education and support, with coaches and with clubs. And we're hoping, in the near future, if we get a grant that we've applied for, we're hoping to do a Becoming Para Ready outreach program where we're going to be going to the clubs to present to them on what it means to be prepared to work with para athletes, what it looks like, and how can we support them in making that happen. Because we need, not want, we need those first involvement with clubs to be positive, and we need clubs to feel supported in it and to feel that they know where to go for the resources when those athletes arrive on their pool decks. So that is something we are continuing to address. And I'm so happy for you that you found a club that worked for you. So we just have a few minutes left because I'm conscious of time. Can you just tell me, what were some of the things at that club that really worked for you? And what was it that they did that made you feel accepted and included into their programming?
Okay, so in 2007, I secured a spot on the Mississauga Aquatics Club with the former head coach. And a couple of the things that really worked for me was, there was open communication from the beginning. So my parents, myself, my coaches were all part of the discussion when things didn't work out, when things worked well. I think if you talked to my former coaches, they would be the first to admit that it didn't all work out smoothly right at the beginning. But one of the things that we were very good at is we had sort of an end goal in mind, and that was to create a consistent training environment where I felt accepted and I could achieve my goals. And we were working towards that. And yes, there were years where the cookie seemed to crumble a little bit, but we worked towards something very amazing by the time, I would say, 2010, 2011 came around. So a couple of the things that they provided for me: a consistent training schedule with dry land, with everything in the same group, with the same group of kids. And it was modified for me when it needed to be modified for me, but it had everybody's goals in mind. So, for instance, it wasn't like it was just me, the para swimmer, swimming in the end lane while everybody else was interacting with the coach and doing their thing. No, we all moved together, and I actually had a conversation with my former coach before I did the presentation to double check this with him, and he did say to me that I did do all the workouts with the my able-bodied teammates, but it would be 75% of it. So for instance, if they were doing hundreds, I was doing 75s, but we were all going on the same pace time. So we all finished at the same time. So nobody seemed like anybody was doing anything that much different. And we all worked together. Certain accommodations they might have made were like, I wasn't a kicker. So maybe a kick set, I did it pull, but we were still doing the same amount or the same circuit. So everybody was, as I said, working together. The second thing is it provided me that challenge every day. Like I had to keep up. Like I went from Variety Village being one of the fastest swimmers in the pool in my disability class to honestly being the slowest one in my group. So I had to, I challenged myself. If I could see the toes of the kid next to me, then I knew I was doing quite well. Another thing, being in that environment where we're training to compete on a regular basis, it really made me a better competitor. I started to enjoy racing because I just had more opportunity to do it. AB clubs tend to go to more meets, and my coach threw me in to a meet every time my team went, even if para swimmers weren't exactly invited. I swam as an exhibition swim, so it was always just part of the process. I was always part of the process, and I think, and one of the things I really learned to do was enjoy racing with my team. And even though we were doing multi-disability classification swims at provincials, yeah, I was swimming with the para swimmers and I wanted to socialize with the para swimmers. But when it was race time, I wanted to get there as fast as I could, touch the wall as fast as I could, because I knew that if I scored points for my team, I was helping the predominantly AB club stay in 10th position, stay in 8th position. And by the time I got to international level, I actually did feel like one of the main athletes that were carrying the team. And that was really a fun experience for me. And especially when the able-bodied athletes understood that and would high five me too, right? Like we were very close in that way. And then I would have to say socially, it just provided me with a place to be myself, be respected. And for the first time in my life, I actually saw integration work. Like it was great to be respected and respect my teammates back and just make friends. And my disability didn't actually matter. We just all did the same thing. Like if I needed help out of the pool, we just got me out of the pool. Like it wasn't a big deal. And I think that just goes from just open communication, ensuring that the able-bodied athletes who are in my group also have the right amount of attention, so it didn't seem like an us and them. We all just kind of worked together. And I think though those were the main things for sure. Just feeling like part of the team, like feeling like, yes, I had my para meets that I had to go to, but like every day I just had somewhere to go to. And so what that I use a wheelchair? So what that I use a walker? We just all have to train, race, train, respect each other, and do our best on race day. Like that was all it was. And congratulate each other when things went really well, and support each other when things didn't go so well, because both things happen in sport, right?
That is true. That's why we keep doing it. You never know what's going to happen. That was really great. So there's some really good pieces there that other people can take and try to implement within their programs, really try to foster that feeling of acceptance and belonging that we know is so important to para-athletes staying in sport. So I think that's awesome. I'm going to ask you one last question. I want to know, can you tell us, we're talking about the development pathway. Well, there is a part of the pathway that we don't like to talk about, and that's our transition off the pathway. So Cynthia, can you please, tell me, what did your transition out of sport look like?
My transition out of sport logistically went very smoothly. I'm not going to lie that it was planned to a certain extent. I had spoken to my coach about it. Part of it was we were going to swim to the end of 2012, the quadrant, and then my coach was moving on. I wasn't quite ready to move on. So he was very supportive of me staying on if I wanted to stay on. So I did. In 2013, I came back, swam to the end of the short course season, decided, no, I really do want to end it right now. And so I did. I let the appropriate parties know, and I transitioned easily into our master's program because I trained out of the University of Toronto, Mississauga, with the age group club, and they also had a master's program. So it was just an easy transition. My former coach was now coaching the master's team, so that was just a very easy transition to move from train to compete to train to for fitness. Mentally was where I struggled a little bit. It was just really hard to all of a sudden go from like 7 practices a week to come whenever you want and not sort of have that push to like make a time to make a competition, or even just to see my teammates every day, see my coach every day. Like it was really hard for me to mentally fill that void of, oh, now what do I do? I don't have swim practice. What do I do? But over about 6 months time, I realized that, okay, I'm going to go back to school. And then once I went back to school, I went to teachers college and then got hired by the school board as an elementary school teacher. That void magically was filled. And so now I'm enjoying master swimming just for fitness pre-COVID. Hopefully I'm going to be able to get back into it once this all calms down, hopefully. But no, it was quite smooth. I can't say it wasn't smooth.
That's awesome. No, that's great. And that's great for people here to hear that transition can be smooth when it's planned and when there's something else to look forward to. That masters is an option for people who move out of the competitive age group paraswimming stream and into that active for life stream. So thank you very much. So Cynthia, I want to thank you for coming and for sharing your stories, your experiences with us. This is how we learn so much more, is from those who've gone before. So at this point, we've been on for about an hour, and I'm going to invite, if anyone has any questions, they can put them in the chat. And if not, thank you so much for attending these REACH webinars. I've really enjoyed putting them on. If you want to review any of them, they are on the Swim Ontario YouTube channel, and this one will be added in the next couple of days. And if you know of anyone who could benefit from watching any of those videos, by all means, please pass the information on to them. This ends this series, but watch for emails. There's always something new that we're going to try and do to try and keep educating our community about paraswimming and about what is needed. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you for your attention.